from Los Angeles. We'll be here for the next couple of hours. Coming up, we'll talk to Clarence Hill of the Fort Worth Star Telegram. We'll also talk to Mike McCarthy of Front Office Sports. And we've got some interesting video for you as well. Our producer is Cam Smith. And we're going to be talking to Clarence Hill Jr., of course, about the Dallas Cowboys. He is the dean of beat reporters for the Dallas Cowboys. I was just watching a video. In fact, I think we ran it yesterday. The video of Jerry Jones, we don't have to run it, Cam, but that we have of Jerry Jones commenting yesterday, as he always does, right? After the Cowboys win over the Rams on Sunday, the questions that Jerry was answering were all from Clarence. Now, Jerry was in the locker room, I guess it was, and we're going to ask Clarence about this. It's going to be a very interesting topic now because nobody who covers Jerry Jones is closer, I mean in proximity, and asked more questions of Jones. So we were watching this video that we played on the show last night because we're always talking about Jerry Jones because nobody really does talk about him in the way that we do. And there's Clarence, like right next to him, firing off questions. Everything Jerry is saying is answers to Clarence Hill Jr. Almost called him Clarence Jones, Jerry Hill. No, it's Clarence Hill Jr. And so we're going to talk to the dean of the Cowboys beat writers in Dallas. And also we'll talk some college football. He's a Texas guy. But Clarence actually, and in terms of Mike McCarthy, he's one of the leading sports media reporters, in case you don't know. He's with frontofficesports.com. And we're going to talk to him about changes at FS1. FS1 has canceled one of their daytime shows, in case you're unaware. Mike broke that story. We'll also talk a little bit about personnel like Chris Carter, what's going on with that. And additionally, Premier League soccer. Mike did a big thing about NBC Sports and what they've been doing with Premier League soccer and trying to make sense of, what's happening in terms of broadcast coverage and like try to give us an idea of how popular it actually is. Because the people in the United States who like Premier League soccer, who aren't Brits, right, don't have the accent, whatever it is, you would think it's as popular as the NFL talking to them. And there's a lot of Johnny-come-latelys. That's fine. That's cool. I love soccer. I played soccer all the way through high school, so I love it. All for it. All becoming popular. But let's not overstate it, at least where it is right now. But this is a great subject, soccer and football and American football. Of course, they call soccer football. And as I told you on this show, and no one else will ever tell you because I had to figure this out from reading reams and reams and reams of college football history books. I told you why our game is called football, right? And everybody else calls football something else. The reason is when Walter Camp named American football at that time, the game was being converted from rugby, and rugby is a kick-centric, if you don't know, game with a ball that is extremely round. And that's the ball initially American football used, and American football was, like rugby, a very kick-centric game, right? That changed over time. We now have the streamlined ball as the forward pass came into play. The other big factor in us sticking with football was back when American football was invented in the 1880s by Yale's Walter Camp. The word soccer was used to describe what we call soccer today. That word was in common use in Britain in England, right? They used soccer and football and they interchanged them, but it was common. Once Americans started to use the word soccer, once it came into common usage in the United States, there have been papers, I've read the papers, dissertations on this, because to me, I'm the kind of guy that says, okay, why is it football? Why do we call this kind of gladiatorial combat game, which has very little kicking in it? Not that kicking's not important in it, it is, but it's not a huge part of the game. Why do we call it football and everybody else around the world calls football something else? And we call what they do soccer. I just told you part of the story. Now, the end of the story is the British stopped calling what they call football today soccer. They stopped using that word when they figured out we were using it, right? And of course, we had named this other game football. So we stuck with soccer and we stuck with football and we stuck with football for this game that we have today because for about 40 years, the ball that was used for what is today football in the United States was round and it was kicked and it was a big part of the game. The drop kick in the NFL was a big part of the game. When the NFL began, to give you an idea, I mean, the drop kick was the number one point of conversation when you talked about the Bears are taking on the Lions and the NFL championship game in the first 10 years of the NFL. It was all about the kicking, all about drop kicking, punting, place kicking, you name it. And so that's why we call it football. There's one other thing. Where did the word soccer come from? It came from the word association, football association. That is kind of the oracle of football around the world. Soccer here is the Football Association, that organization in England. And from the word association came the word soccer. How? I don't know. I have to look. That's one more thing, right? But that's such a basic thing. And nobody knows. I mean, literally nobody knows the answer. And what really sucks is you could stay on Google all damn day. You'll never find the answer. It took a long time. And, for all I know, I mean, the guy who invented the game in America, our football, Walter Camp, he never came out and said, he's got 2 new biographies. By the way, football history, is it important? Well, Walter Camp, the guy who invented football, had a scholarly biography, like a Rod Chernow and Hamilton, right? Or some of the stuff he does now, those biographies. Walter Camp had never had that. And we've had 2 scholarly biographies about Walter Camp in the last decade. And I think one of the reasons is football has become so pivotal in our culture. It's moved the center of our culture. And and that's, of course, what we're talking about today. We're spending all day talking about it. We spent the last few months every day, 95% of what we do. The other part of it is pretty much media. We haven't really talked basketball or baseball or anything because I know you guys want to know about football. I want to talk about it. So there's something that Clarence tweeted out earlier today, linked to a video that Maverick put out on his Twitter. Maverick Carter, of course, working with LeBron James. And it was a video. And if you have that video ready, Cam Smith, our producer here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred, if you have that video, Josh Gordon, of course, who was suspended by the NFL for substance abuse, apparently, allegedly, I guess, by the Seahawks. He was playing for the Seahawks. Now he's suspended again. A video tweeted out by Maverick Carter, retweeted by Clarence Hill. This is where I saw it. And it has Josh Gordon in this video. This is a recent video where he's describing how the football coaches, when he was at Baylor, helped him. He described the method and how they would help him beat, cheat on drug tests at Baylor. So if you have that clip, I want to talk
He,
about
I've been enabled most of my life, honestly. I mean, I've been enabled by coaches, teachers, professors, everybody pretty much gave me a second chance kind of just because of my ability. So not too long after I got arrested for possession of marijuana at Baylor, one of my coaches, he came by saying, you're going to get drug tested by the compliance office. This is how it's going to work. This is what they're going to do. If they do call you in, here goes these bottles of detox. He showed me how to drink them, showed me how to take them. And that was, I think, my real first experience with, like, getting over on the system and that authority not really being taken serious because it was kind of being guided by somebody that's employed by the same, university. I'm out of detox drinks. Where's coach with my drinks? Not enough time, gotta take a drug test, failed the drug test.
what they don't do that. Hold on. They don't do that in the NFL? Wow. I guess not. Maybe some teams do. Interesting. Baylor, it's funny because Baylor is this, if you've ever been to Baylor, you go down to Waco. Um, it's this Baptist school. I think it's like the Baptist religion, right? In the United States. It's like the flagship school for Baptists in the United States. Baylor is. So it's a very, very, and it's a dry county, as our producer Cam Smith points out still, right? So you have this religiosity. How worthless is that? Um, but one thing I wanted to say about that, as you assess, Josh Gordon's situation, the fact that the authority, the people in charge from the time, and it's the reason I left the initial part in on that clip. It doesn't talk about the drug testing, but it talks about the enabling from the time he could walk. Once people saw he was this great athlete, when you think about the impact in your life when you're young growing up, your surroundings, the people and how they treated you and how it molds you into what you are, and you look at him as this alleged repeat offender when it comes to substance abuse of what we're talking marijuana here. First of all, that's a joke. And you know what? I don't blame the league necessarily for banning marijuana right now, the NFL of all leagues. Good Lord. But I mean, it's the Players Association. They have to do something. It's just like one and done in college. That shouldn't exist. And the reason it still exists is the NBA players. Because if the NBA players threw down the gauntlet, one and done would be finished. We'd have the ability of high school players to come into the NBA. The NBA players are blocking that right now. And 95% of them don't know that because whenever we hear about the inability of a player to jump into the NBA or his maltreatment by the NCAA, right? We hear NBA players on Twitter or they talk about what an injustice it is that they can't just turn, well, they can't turn pro. It's because of your union that they pro. I'm very confident the league will go along with it. But the players don't even know. That's why they're saying those things, and nobody corrects them. So the NFL and the marijuana situation, when you think about the nature of the NFL and that human beings were not made to play this. All right, got a problem with the mic. Got a little excited there. But human beings were not made to play what we call, football in this country. It is football, American football. And yeah, that was me, by the way, Cam. Just like clipped the microphone with my hand. So we're not physically made to do that. You cannot, if you're playing a position where you're going to get contact on every play, right? A line position, linebacker position, running back position, things like that. Trust me when I tell you, take it from someone who's been through that. When I was a freshman walk on at the University of Georgia, running Oklahoma drills, my first spring practice there, right? Uh, Trust me when I tell you, you cannot play football at the major college level, let alone the NFL, without the use of pharmaceuticals. Period. You can't. And these NFL teams are candy stores for pharmaceuticals. And we got a glimpse of that as it pertains to the Saints, you may remember. But that is a deeper, and we're talking about opioids, okay? And it really should bring pause whenever you read one of these profiles. I can remember when John Gruden was on his initial run, as this genius with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have to pull it out sometime. And they puff piece on him in Sports Illustrated. We followed him around. This guy's a genius. What is he doing? Revolutionary, John Gruden, when he wins the Super Bowl in Tampa, and then everything goes to hell. Um, but a big part, and I remember at the time, this was before I think social media had to be. I remember at the time because we really hadn't heard this kind of thing before. And I'm not making any accusations at all, not implying anything by this. Just a coincidence that I brought this up. But in this profile in Sports Illustrated, you might look that up if you have time, Cam. Go to that SI vault. And when Gruden was with the Buccaneers, somebody did a big profile, and I believe it was SI. And it was the first time where we heard, now we hear this all the time, but it was the first time where about a guy that was getting like 3 hours sleep. That was what the article touted. It was a big part of the article. Now, I remember Joe Gibbs, remember in the 80s with the Redskins, sleeps in his office. You may remember that if you're old enough. That was a big thing. Joe Gibbs, can you imagine? Sleeps in his office. Right. And I'm not saying he didn't, but something tells me, maybe George Hallis did at some point before then. Maybe that wasn't all that uncommon, but you would think it was. That was part of I mean, if you go back in time, you see how we treat coaches today like gods, whether it's in pro, especially in college. I mean, the college game is all about coaches, literally, because the players come and go. And if you notice, by the way, as an aside, somebody like Saban, his offense, right, is not really set up to celebrate the individual. It's not really set up to provide for improvisation. Saban doesn't bring in savant offensive coordinators in the way, let's say, LSU did with Joe Brady, and we saw the result, right? Burrow had played the year before and was pedestrian at best. Burrow was 200-1 as a Heisman Trophy candidate this year. 200-1. They bring in Joe Brady. It's a game changer. You're not going to see that at Alabama. Alabama is all about the coach, and it's all about, and the team, and the success of the team is a function of Nick Saban's recruiting, right? And their stockpile of talent. There's a lot of teams around the country that can match up with a team like Alabama, right, at the top of the depth chart. But when you go to number 2, you go to number 3 on that depth chart. Oregon, I think, would be an example of that. You look at teams on the West Coast. I mean, USC used to be like that. But Saban All the focus in college football is on the coaches. And so what Saban does is he employs this gray shirting technique in which he simply cuts players who aren't good enough. Then he tells the players that I'm not going to help you transfer to another school. I'm not going to put in a good word for you unless you know, give the reason I'm giving you to give as to why you're transferring, right? If you don't make something up like you were hurt or you weren't good enough or you wanted to be closer to your family, I'm not going to put the good word in for you around the country. And so that guy is gone from Alabama, that player. That happens every minute of the day in college football. People talk about the transfer portal and how it's taking over college football. Well, I just gave you one of the very good reasons why it is. And thank God for it. Finally, the players are able to exercise a little independence. And think about this. And this is something that I haven't heard anybody say or write. Cam, I don't know. I know you follow college football. I don't know if you've heard this, but take a look at the Heisman Trophy finalists. All right. Besides Chase Young, if it was up to Urban Meyer or Ryan Day, would Joe Burrow be at that ceremony? Would Joe Burrow be the Heisman Trophy winner if we did not have a transfer portal? No, he wouldn't. Because, of course, he signed and played for Ohio State. Urban Meyer, if he had stuck around, how do you think that'd work out for Joe Burrow? What about Jalen Hurts? What if he hadn't transferred? Would he have been in New York? Absolutely not. What about Justin Fields? Now we've seen how great a player he is. And you could certainly make the argument that he's a pretty damn good drop back passer, very accurate passer. And to me, as a Georgia fan, I'm watching our games at the end of the year, and I'm thinking to myself, as a Georgia fan, this season, Jesus, do I wish we had Justin Fields, that we had, you know, gone with him. And it's not like he wasn't touted. He was the number one recruit in the country when Kirby Smart and Georgia signed him. But we've got Jake Fromm, who's this genius, who's missing throws all over the field. Brutal, Jake Fromm. Brutal. Um, so Justin Fields ends up going to. Thank God somebody called him an epithet, right? I guess Justin Fields justified in these ridiculous, made up, arbitrary, unfair rules that prevents a player from becoming immediately eligible when they transfer. You have to give some sort of reason. And it was because someone had called Justin Fields, I think, a racial epithet, a racial slur. And so that's what was used to justify Justin Fields becoming immediately eligible at Ohio State. Um, so all three of those guys that I just ticked off were transfers. And without that new rule, they would not have transferred because they would have not been immediately eligible. It wouldn't have even been a thought process, right? So, as Cam points out, our producer, Burrow was third string at Ohio State 2 years ago. And Justin Fields at Georgia wasn't even on the roster at Georgia. And you point out, Cam also makes an interesting comparison between Fromm and Fields at Georgia to Chris Sims and Vince Young at Texas. And interesting, very, very interesting that that you bring that up when you think about it. And, boy, you hate to bring up race in that situation. And I'm not saying that it's racist that happened, but it's a pretty remarkable coincidence Pretty remarkable. And the other part of that discussion is that you're not going to hear on any other show is when you bring up race in the context of that situation. Again, Georgia goes with Jake Fromm over Justin Fields. Fields goes to Ohio State. And if you poll Georgia fans, I'm one of them. I was a football player, Georgia. My friends or whatever, you polled all of us and you asked us, who would you rather have today? Fields or Fromm for Georgia? We'd all say Fields. Every one of us. Black guy, Fromm the white guy. Georgia keeps the white guy, right? And now, we've got this great comparison. Chris Sims at Texas and Vince Young at Texas at the same time. And they couldn't decide what to do there. Mac Brown. I mean, look, I understand in the case of Chris Sims, you've got the dad, you've got the All-American him and the anointed one. But I mean, think of Vince Young. Think about him in college. It's amazing to think that Vince Young and Reggie Bush played at the same time, because you could certainly make the argument that Vince Young was the greatest college quarterback of all time. I went to that USC Texas game, the Rose Bowl game. And when I tell you it was a men among boys. Now, USC, it's by now it's long forgotten, but the entire roster of USC on defense had been decimated by injuries. By the time we got to the fourth quarter of the Rose Bowl, when Vince Young pulled off that amazing run to end the game and win it for Texas and play the way he did, I'm not saying he wasn't a great quarterback. I just told you, you could make the argument he's the greatest college quarterback of all time. But USC was totally decimated on defense. And that is at the point when Pete Carroll had actually gutted. This is the other big part of USC's downfall. And one of the reasons why, along with what he knew were violations that were coming, Carroll left. And that is, he had turned over his coaching staff and hired a bunch of unqualified yes men on that coaching staff. Pete Carroll at USC. I mean, he was hiring graduate assistants as full-time assistants. I was there at the time. I was covering the team every day. See, flagship station, living it. And there was a mountain of criticism for Carroll and the way he treated the program and how he changed over time. Became arrogant, didn't want to be challenged by his assistant coaches. And then when you got all the injuries, you add that in there, and you saw what happened in the Rose Bowl. It was a remarkable thing, though, to see Reggie Bush and Vince Young play at the same time. Reggie Bush is the greatest running back I've ever seen in college, ever. I have no problem saying that. No problem. But like Vince Young, it was a man among boys. And Bush was just big enough to pull that off, to be able to break those tackles, to use his transcendent speed and moves. He didn't have that luxury in the NFL. It wasn't big enough. So he wasn't able to pull it off. Vince Young, though, I still to this day think he really didn't get, I mean, there's a lot who criticize him, say he's a dumb guy, he's not very smart. I've heard that a lot from people, and I don't buy into that. Listen, you don't play quarterback in the NFL as well as he did and at the University of Texas if you're dumb. You can't do that. Cam Newton, same thing. Oh, by the way, they're both black. Surprise. But what I was going to point out about Georgia and Texas, as we're looking at race here in the United States, you can't blame human beings for, first of all, willfully ignoring something as traumatic as what the country went through as it pertains to race. When you look at the treatment of black people, how they feel about it, and then, of course, the guilt of white people, right? Not that under the age of 30 feel all that much guilt because they're not educated on race. No one is. And so that's why I think it's important to bring up in the context of the Fromm and Fields situation when I said, oh, what a coincidence. Georgia keeps Fromm, the black guy Fields, based on a racial slur, is made eligible at Ohio State. That was his argument. And then we have the Young Sims. This Young and Sims is different. It didn't happen that way, but we didn't have the transfer portal. But that was a mess situation at Texas. I remember it. And Young was black, right? The guy should have been playing all along. But my point, the big was Georgia didn't have a black player. Georgia did not have a black player on its roster until 1973. It's the oldest state school in the United States, Georgia. It's the oldest public university in the United States. Public. University of Georgia. It's like 1708 or something ridiculous, just right after Harvard. So they had never had a black football player until 1973. Texas, University of Texas, was the last school in the Southwest Conference, which is the Big 12 conference. You know, we know Southwest Conference went away, but the Southwest Conference was Arkansas, Texas A&M, TCU, all these schools, right? Texas, Baylor, Rice, they were all in the Southwest Conference. And Texas was the very last school to add a black player on the roster in 1969, both in my lifetime. And when you watch, because you'll see this once in a while, I mean, it's 150 years today that college football's been around. And I don't know if you've seen this, but some college football teams have been putting that 150 logo on their helmets. The reason they're doing that is for the 100th anniversary of college football in 69, they put 100 logos, the shape of a football, on all the college football teams. Everybody had that logo on their helmet, replacing their logo during the season. Texas was no different. But at the time, Texas was wearing that 100th anniversary logo and playing Arkansas 1 versus 2 at the end of the season in an unbelievable game. It's called the game of the century. That's the game Richard Nixon attended. And then they went on to win, I believe it was the Cotton Bowl, Texas, won the national title. That was the last deliberately all-white team in college football history to win the national title in college football. So I grew up learning to read by reading college football history books, you know, and I grew up in a Notre Dame family. My father went there. My brother went to Notre Dame, all graduated. My cousin went to Notre Dame, Patrick. So I used to go to Notre Dame every year. And so I knew all about Notre Dame against Texas, this, you know, because I'm an old guy, right? I knew all about that. Backwards and forwards. I read all the history books, all that stuff, you know, the Sports Illustrated articles, the profiles, the retrospectives, all those things, right? And I thought I knew the story. I thought I knew everything about it. And obviously I didn't, because there wasn't one word about Texas being deliberately all white, which it was. And if you go onto that campus today at the University of Texas or my alma mater at Georgia, I did it 2 years ago at the University of Georgia. I didn't do it all damn day, but we went around. I was with a friend of mine who went to school with me at the time. It was 2 years ago at my school, and we just asked random people, "Do you know what year was the first year was we had black football players at Georgia?" Nobody knew. Nobody had any idea. And when I told them 1973, they almost fell over. But if you go to Texas today, it's the same thing. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And That's not right. That doesn't make sense that I'm the only guy bringing that up, right? I'm the only guy. And all the things that we have superficially, the conversation about sports or culture, this AOK thing that's going on with the Army Navy game and the students and the white supremacy symbol, this I guess white supremacists use the AOK sign that we all have used in the past as I don't know, a signal to each other or something. Um, they've co-opted it. Well, they haven't co-opted it for me. I'm still using it. If I end up using it, I'm not even thinking about it. But we have this entire conversation about things like that, and it's offensive. It's not offensive. How prevalent is it? And that conversation, that whole situation wouldn't exist if people knew that Army was the last school outside the South to have a black football player. Of all the schools outside the South, remember I told you Georgia was 73, Ole Miss and LSU were 73. The first black players that went into the SEC were 74. Texas was 69. That was the last all-white team. The last school outside the South, outside the SEC, the Southwest Conference, and the ACC to have a black player of all schools, of all I should say, football programs, right, was the United States Military Academy at West Point Army. The United States of America barred blacks from playing football at Army until 1966, right? And it isn't like the guy who was the pioneering player at the time. It's not like that person wasn't kind of a high profile person. It's Gary Steele, who is the father of Sage Steele. And Gary Steele was a great player, arguably, history. He was this kind of when you think of wide receivers today in the NFL, right? That was him in 1966. Incredible athletic guy, but great hands, you name it. And he tore it up for Army. And but his daughter is Sage Steele, the anchor at ESPN, the first woman, let alone African American, to anchor coverage of the Masters golf tournament. Sage Steele is his daughter. And to ESPN's credit, they've done some features on him and the significance of it. But I mean, he should be part of Army Navy, still around. God bless the guy. And he is. He should be front and center. And for all I know, he might be. He might be. But and it's not even so much that we should all be told these things during the broadcast, right? Or during Sports Center. No. We should be, now that football's so important that we're consumed, obviously, we're doing it here. There's a million talk shows, a million people talking about it all day, every day. Has to be physically inescapable in this country. It's never been more popular, right? So with that in mind, this is something that should be in school books. This should be, every American should learn about this. And we haven't even begun to teach any of that. We've actually short shrifted it. We've actually short shrifted completely sports in general. Let me give you an example of how we've overlooked sports to our detriment. What I've found in my researching for different projects, it's amazing. Think about Adolf Hitler in Germany and the Nazi Olympics. More specifically, think about Jesse Owens. You know Jesse Owens, right? The Olympics he was in. It was the Nazi Olympics, the master race, the Aryans, and he repudiated that with his performance, as did many Americans and African Americans, right? Uh, and so the way it's framed in the United States is, we showed Hitler, didn't we? We really got him on that one, right? We showed him, didn't we? Forget, we really showed him. So, just on its face, how absurd is that? How ridiculous is that? And of course, Jesse Owens goes back to Jim Crow America. Um, so, but my point about the Nazi Olympics is in 36. By 1936 Olympics is vision cameras that we have today were invented by the Nazis. Live broadcasts of sports, wall to wall, 24/7, that was invented by the Nazis. Live television broadcasts of sports started at the 1936 Olympics. And they have footage of it still. They kept it. We have it. The modern media age in sports began with the Germans in the 36 games. Why did that happen? That happened because the Nazis were consumed with getting their message out and keeping power while they had it. The other big part of that was building the stadium. Originally, when they got the 36 Olympics, they were going to renovate this crummy stadium in Berlin for the Olympic Games because the economy was a disaster in Germany, right? At that time in 36. But the Nazis are in power. Hitler comes in 33, right? And he realizes, hey, if I build this enormous building, the biggest building in Germany, the Olympic Stadion, it's called the Olympia Stadion, Olympic Stadium, that's going to be us. That's the Nazis, right? That's going to perpetuate our presence in political life, social life of Germany. They're trying to perpetuate this new Nazi party. For the first time, has just got power, and they're clinging to it, and they want to have credibility with the people. And so that's what all of the innovation with the television camera, with the dissemination of the games themselves, right? And then, of course, you've got the documentary propaganda film Olympia, and which was used just as a marketing film for the Nazi Party around the world. So another big part of the 1936 Olympics, when you think about how I'm comparing this now to how we have ignored our situation with football, the injustices that have gone on. And now we're dealing with things that in some ways you could make the argument do still involve race as a factor, yet it's completely ignored, right? See it. We don't have any clue. Like when I bring up Jake Fromm staying at Georgia, Justin Fields going to Ohio State, Vince Young not playing as much as he should have at Texas compared to Chris Sims, right? People look at me like I've got three heads. That's the whole point in me going through, giving you the knowledge about our country, our history in the most important, unique pastime in American history, football. Truly, uniquely American tradition that doesn't extend outside our borders. That's what football is in this country. It is really, really important. I don't have to tell you that. So I gave you a little history there that none of us know that we should. And then I'm giving a little history with something that we've really overlooked in a cataclysmic way. Not just us, but everyone, the Germans themselves. And it's about the Nazi Olympics. That's what I'm setting up if you're just joining us on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Because this all relates to us and our own, you know, lack of knowledge about ourselves for whatever reason. I don't know the reason for that. You can speculate, but I'm not speculating about what I'm telling you now. And so and so the television camera, the live broadcast, television broadcasts of sports began with the 1936 Olympics. And it was all about the Nazis perpetuating the party, impressing the people of Germany. It wasn't about, like, when you think about why they had the Olympics and how they, when the whole world came to Germany, you've heard this, you taught this in school, that the Nazis, stopped mistreating Jews while the Americans and the rest of the world came to Germany for the Olympics. And they did. And at the time, everybody knew it. Everybody in the United States was reading newspapers every day about this deliberate attempt to pretend they weren't abusing the Jews, right? Everybody knew that at the time. Just go to newspapers.com and do a search, and you can find it in 2 seconds. So there was no secret. And at the time, what they were printing, what they were doing, Joseph Goebbels himself, he would be interviewed by Grantland Rice. You know Grantland, right? Grantland Rice would interview Joseph Goebbels during the 36 Olympics in Germany. And Goebbels would be asking Grantland Rice, why don't you let black people vote? Yet you have them over here representing your country. He was talking about the South, right? Literacy tests in the South, blocking blacks from voting. You don't let blacks vote in your country. So how are they represent things like that? That's what was happening, you know. But it was all about for Hitler and the Nazis, Goebbels. It was all about convincing the people of Germany that they were legitimate, that they should maintain power and authority, and that the people should listen to them as they're putting their compulsory Hitler Youth programs into the schools, which they were. They had already done that. And the people of Germany were getting tired of it. All this new Nazi crap. Jesus, right? They're not stupid. So at the time of the games in 36, before that, 35, 36, as they're building the stadium, spending all this money on the Olympic Games. And this is really a monument to the Nazis, which it still is to the rest of the world today, but not to Germany because it's still there. And it was used for the World Cup by the Germans. So I'm going to get back to that. But first, we're going to go out to New York and talk to one of the men on the vanguard of sports media. One of the guys that when you read his stuff, you're going to learn something new. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to go out to Texas. Yeah, we're going to go out to Texas and talk some Dallas Cowboys, talk hopefully some college football, hopefully some barbecue with Clarence Hill Jr. Clarence, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. And I was just telling the audience earlier how much I enjoyed the last time I saw Jerry Jones after this last game. I saw you right there. I mean, every single thing Jerry was saying, he was answering your questions. You were like right next to him. It was hilarious. It's awesome.
It's what we do after the Cowboys game. We actually I don't go listen to Jason Garrett, the head coach. I go to Jerry Jones' press conference. That's what makes Dallas unique.
It does. And I don't know, maybe it's a given. Maybe it's just me, but I don't think people really, when we're talking about Jason Garrett and his future, I think there should always be a caveat. There should always be a mention of, well, Dallas is completely unique. They've got this one owner who has his own radio show, and just by having his radio show, he undermines the coach. I mean, I heard Troy Aikman last week on the radio in Dallas, Clarence, saying that if I was in the front office of the Cowboys, the coach would be the only person who had a radio show. And that was kind of what I was referencing. But when you're talking about Jason Garrett, don't you have to look at that situation differently than any other situation when it comes to a coach in the NFL?
Well, yeah, but the flip side is when you talk about firing Jason and adding a new coach, you need to find a coach that can handle that dynamic. You know, I mean, be honestly, this Jason thing is sailed at this point. You know, unless they do something miraculous and win the Super Bowl, you know, they're going to move on from Jason. You know, and so yes, this is something he's had to deal with. But he's also been here 10 years. You know, and you know it's time for them to move on. Uh, and so when you start looking at other guys who you can bring in, you know, who can you bring in that can handle Jerry being Jerry in this situation? That's one reason why Jason stayed so long, is because he allowed Jerry to be Jerry. He was comfortable. Jason has been with, you know, was here when Jerry was uh, initially bought the team when they were winning Super Bowl titles in the 1990s, and so he understood the dynamic of the unique coaching situation of the Cowboys. You know, who else can you bring in that can handle that? And that's why you need to look at that situation because you know it's one thing to talk about these names, another thing to have someone that can deal with the owner having a press conference after the game and having two radio shows.
We're visiting with the dean of Cowboys beat writers in Texas, Clarence Hill Jr. of the Fort Worth Star Telegram. When you're talking about Jason Garrett, and I've been wondering this out loud on my show, what is different about this year as to why the ship has sailed on him as opposed to last few years where there were times when the situation looked somewhat similar, but he wasn't fired?
Yeah, well, the big difference is that he's out of contract. You know, his contract is up, and it was said before the season, number one, that you know he would have to go further than last year and show more progress than last year, take the next step from last year. You know, they've won division titles, they've won a couple of wild card games. They haven't gotten past the divisional playoff round under Garrett and everything the Cowboys did in the offseason to improve this team. They were looking to take the step forward, not necessarily take a step back and be 7-7 and be surviving the equally floundering Philadelphia Eagles for a final playoff spot and possibly get waxed in the first round by a 12-14. So that's been the biggest difference is he's out of contract. There's no safety net anymore for Garrett and Jones in regards to Garrett's contract and situation. So are they going to give him a new deal coming off a 7-9, 8-8 season? No.
Something that because of the age of Twitter, I think it is, or social media, a lot of people have gotten to see it where the players ignore Jason Garrett when he does the high five, the low five, whatever it is, you know, and I'm not saying it happens every 5 minutes, but it's happened. And, I mean, is there anything to that at all? Is there anything to read into that, or is it just the players didn't see him, or what are your thoughts about that?
No, I mean I think that's when you see players come out the field and everybody, we can take a video clip and turn it into whatever you want. And so you see about a video clip of them come out the field and some slap high five, some don't. They just go straight to the bench. You should not read anything into that. The fact is that this team has not quit on Garrett. The message there is that they're ignoring Garrett. They don't care about Garrett and they don't want to play for him. That's further from the truth. You haven't really seen the Cowboys in all of Garrett's years get blown out. You've seen them fight to the end. There have been many seasons, even back when they were 8-8, when they were playing for a playoff spot in the final game. They didn't always win. They didn't always get there, but they haven't quit on Jason Garrett. And just like this season, when it seemed like things was getting ready to go awry, they rise up and beat the Rams on Sunday, and really they win the division with a victory against the Eagles this weekend. So I think that's where video doesn't tell the whole story, and it's certainly not the story about this team, because these Cowboys, right or wrong, they parrot everything Jason Garrett says. I think that's probably, if you want to know what the biggest problem with this team is, they have lacked a sense of urgency because of Garrett's mundane style that they parrot. Garrett's business, one thing at a time. This game is not more important than that game, and so they'll always come out and play with the fire they need to, because they're following Garrett. They're following Garrett's lead.
That Jason Garrett takes over the offense in the red zone, and the Cowboys become conservative, or just in general, Kellen Moore doesn't have a free hand, and that's a big problem for the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, and I'm not trying to even be a Garrett defender supporter. His record is what it is. I said a few weeks ago they should have moved on from Garrett, and I believe that they will move on and have going to move on from him in the offseason. But we can't parse games and say, well, when the Cowboys win and things are doing well, it's Kellen Moore's made decision. When things are going bad or they're struggling, then it's Jason Garrett stepping in. And I agree with Garrett. As Garrett said, it's always been a collective thing, but this is as much on Moore's than on Garrett. Their inability to make plays at certain times. They're not using Tony Pollard as they planned to early in the season. Some of the stuff that's also has something to do with the first year coordinators. You know, we keep forgetting that Kellen Moore's in his first year. He's not going to be perfect. He's going to make mistakes. He's never done this before.
Who's
So
going to be a
some of
good
this is
coach
on
at
an
Cowboys?
experienced coordinator as well. Man, that's the $64,000 question. As I said, because of the unique dynamics around this situation, dealing with Jerry Jones, obviously, uh, Jerry would have loved to make a run at Sean Payton. He's had a fancy for Payton ever since he was an assistant here under Parcells, and certainly after uh, he had the success in New Orleans. They have a great relationship. They still hang out and party together and do a lot of things together. Uh, but obviously that ship has sailed. Payton signed a new deal with the Saints, and there's no way to get out of that. But barring that, I mean, you're looking at the normal group. I mean, obviously everybody's been talking about Urban Meyer. He's expressed interest. Went on a
Yeah.
damn practice show and said the coach would be crazy not to want to coach the Cowboys and would love that job. And so you have to put his name out there at the top of the list. Other guys, certainly the college coaches that have been bandied about, Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, Matt Rule at Baylor. They're going to merit some consideration. Matt Rule could have the Jets job last year, but they wouldn't give him control, so he decided to stay at Baylor. This is a guy who's been on the NFL radar for some time, and you see why. You see how this team he has turned around a a cesspool that was the Baylor program and made them winners again. So you have to impress with those guys. Do certainly Lincoln Riley, being close to Dallas, with the Sooners and playing in Dallas every year. Jerry Jones has liked his style and liked his offense, right? He's handled his quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Uh, those guys. I also look at the Greg Moman, the Baltimore offensive coordinator, and what he's done with Kaepernick and what he's done with Lamar, what can he do with Dak and these guys? And so nobody's really talking about him, but here's a guy who's proven it on the pro level that he can direct the offense and lead a team to the Super Bowl. So here's a
Where did
guy that,
the
that I
Lincoln
think that should,
Riley
be at the
talk
top
about
of the
has been
list as
going on
well.
forever? What's the origin of that? Is there some sort of connection there? Has Jerry mentioned Lincoln in the past? Is there a certain media outlet? Where does that come from?
No, they come from the Sean McVay school of we need a offensive guy who can be creative, and it's all of that, and last year, especially with one reason why they went after Kellen Moore because he can or promoted Kellen Moore is because he can do some of that college stuff, that creative stuff that they're doing on a college level. Well, if you're looking for that type of stuff, then and no one's better at it in a close proximity to Dallas, who's doing it on a national level and taking three different quarterbacks, three different style of quarterbacks become Heisman winners and Heisman candidates. That's Lincoln Riley, and so he's gone to Oklahoma for coach before and Barry Switzer. There is a relational between OU and Dallas just because of those ties that go way back. So that's where it is, But Lincoln Riley, I think, is going to be mentioned in a lot of different places, whether it's Cleveland,
This is when Clarence
to
Hill
pair back
Jr.
up with Baker
Before we start
Mayfield and other
talking
players.
about
People are going to
guys
go
who
after
go
Lincoln
to
Riley. He's a very
college,
good coach.
can you help me make sense of what's going on in Texas and Tom Herman? I mean, what's happening with that program right now?
Right now I've said that Tom Brady, I mean Tom Herman, excuse me, has not been what Texas hoped he was going to be. And this notion that he was some offensive guru to help the Ohio State Buckeyes win a championship, and
Right.
because he was the play
Right.
caller. Well, he was the play caller with a bunch of pros, with Michael Thomas and Zeke Elliott and some of those guys. But he doesn't have those guys. Obviously, things aren't easy to call plays and
Yeah, I
and,
can hear
and,
you.
and run an offense. And
I can hear you.
it's
Go ahead.
can you hear me? Yeah.
You're not. I
So
don't think you're cutting out. Are you?
it,
Were you cutting out? I don't think. I think
I can hear. I
just
can
keep
hear
talking.
you
I
guys.
think you should be fine.
I can still hear you.
Or you got an echo or something?
I can hear.
Maybe.
Um,
I don't know. Did something change? I don't think so. I think we're okay. Yeah, I can hear you, and we can hear you. So
I
maybe
can
you
hear you
can't hear
guys,
me.
and
Is that what it is,
fine.
Cam? Okay, then we're good. Just go ahead.
I can hear you. But as I said, it's just been this woman. He's been a fraud. I mean, he's been a fraud so far in Texas, and what they thought they were getting, and now you're firing your offensive coordinator, your defensive coordinator in year three. You know, that's your mulligan. You have no more cards to play if you don't get it done next year. The chopping block comes on you, and he's replaced his defense coordinator with Chris Ash, a former Ohio State defense coordinator who was on the same staff with him at Ohio State. And
Yeah.
yes, Ash is a quality defense coordinator from his time at Ohio State. He's a failed head coach at Rutgers, but for Texas fans, it's more the same. It's a comfort hire. Here's a guy you knew you had a relation with. That's why you hired him. And that was the problem when he initially came to Texas. He brought coordinators he was familiar with. And so instead of going out and getting the best and the brightest, and then you have to go and have your staff, 3 years in, and you still haven't hired an offensive coordinator, which actually has cost him a couple of recruits already, before signing day. And because number one, at least according to reports and rumors, he doesn't want to turn over his office to a guy like Graham Harrell at USC
Very, very
and some other
good.
guys. He
How
wants
is
to
their
keep his
recruiting?
offense. He
How
wants a
is
guy
the
to come in and
talent?
run his offense.
Are they
Well,
making
his offense has
money?
been a
What's it
failure
look
so
like in
far.
Texas in terms of recruiting under Tom Herman?
Well, they've had a couple of top 10 classes. This year's class, they've had a lot of decommits after things, kind of went south this year. I think, right now their current class is ranked 18th in the country. It's solid, but it's not special.
I
And you
got
need
you.
special players. The good news is that yes, yes, we got it. But the good news for Texas, they finally got a 5-star running back. They got a running back out of Arizona that they think can be a difference maker. And that's something they haven't had. They haven't had a difference maker in the backfield. To really get the running game going. It's the same at Texas with so many running backs and historic running backs coming out of
So,
Texas and
real
offensive
quick,
linemen and
you
all this other stuff that
tweeted
you
something
haven't
out
had
today from Maverick
a
Carter
difference maker runner
about Josh
in almost a
Gordon
decade.
and his time at Baylor, and obviously you're right there with Baylor, and know what's going on there, and have known what's going on there more than most people over the years. What was your reaction to come to find out that Josh Gordon was aided in beating those drug tests apparently at Baylor?
Yeah, I mean that's what jumped out to me because I was just because everything with Josh Gordon he's suspended again in Seattle and interrupted put out a video of him that they did with him a couple of years ago when he was going through his travails and drug treatment. Is talking about his demons, and I went in there just to learn about Josh Gordon and what he said about his demons because I'm familiar with him from Baylor. He's from Houston. He's a Texas guy. Uh, and one of the initial things he talked about was that he was at Baylor. He's been using drugs all his life. Going back to high school, he said he's never played a game or whatever else, but he wasn't high or on something. And whether it's marijuana or codeine or something like that.
Wow.
And he got to Baylor, and the coaches instructed him, taught him how to beat the test. And not only did they teach him how to beat the test, so he beat a few tests, and then they abandoned him. When they needed to take a test again, they couldn't be found. And so it was just interesting that so much has gone on at Baylor. And obviously, again, I talked about Matt Rule and how he's turned around that situation and turned around that program and on the field and off the field. And, he's above reproach right now. You can't question what Matt Rule has done, but it's just another knock on that Baylor team under Art Briles with all those rape cases and all that win at all costs. And the fact that they're the ones who was one of the main enablers of Josh Gordon and teaching a player how to beat a test. Obviously, I'm not going to be naive and think that that doesn't happen or it hasn't happened, but just for a coaching staff to,
And
not only it's
to
one thing to
what you
let you
said
stay on the
right
team after you
before
fail
that,
a test,
he had
but you're the
been
ones who are teaching
enabled.
them how to
He made
beat the
that
test.
acknowledgement.
That just jumped out for
And
me.
then we say, oh, he's got demons. Yeah, the demons are the coaches. The demons are the high school, are the AAU
Right.
people, or whoever it is. But the coaches, the people of authority. And to me, that's a
Right.
critical disconnect with the public about ball players in general in his situation. It just, I just go crazy hearing something like that. That's the message that should be out there. And I think there's a hell of a lot more Baylors out there in that situation as that was happening than people want to believe. I think there's other schools doing that.
There's no question there is, and again, again, whether was the Baylor situation or any of these other cheating situations, it's always been a situation of do what it takes to win. Let's keep these guys eligible. And he talks about whether it's high school teachers, high school coaches, everybody continue to enable him and 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 pass him along despite all these times he's failed. I mean, I don't even know what his grades were like or whatever else going back to high school if we're doing all these drugs, but there have been so many enablers, but certainly on the college level, it's a huge problem. Obviously Baylor has the target is because the microscope has been on them because of so much of the stuff in the past. But yeah, it's a shame. And so, yes, Josh Gordon is his own man. He's responsible for his own situation. But so many times these kids could have gotten help. This thing could have stopped a long time
So
ago if the
who's your
adults in their
friend,
life, the
Clarence?
adults in the
Who do
situation
we
would have
have here?
stepped up and been adults.
Who is your friend here? Thank you
Huh?
so much.
Oh, I'm
You know
sorry.
what, guys?
This
Thank
is
you
my
both so
daughter.
much for
I'm
hanging out with
sorry.
us today. I can't thank you enough for the time, Clarence. That's Clarence Hill Jr., the dean of Dallas
All right, thank
Cowboys
you,
beat
man. No problem.
writers, and he's in Fort Worth. Now let's go out to New York City and talk to the vanguard of sports media. If you want to know what's going to happen before it happens, you follow Mike McCarthy at Front Office Sports. He's the man, and we're going to talk to him about Fox Sports, FS1, and some other stuff. So, but we're happy to have him back. Someone who's on Twitter. Mike, I can't thank you enough, man. Thanks for dropping in.
Hey, happy holidays. Great to be here.
You too. And so you broke some news that kind of flew a little bit under the radar, but I think it's really significant over the past couple of weeks, reporting about a show that's been canceled on FS1 in kind of a prime daytime area. What's the story on that, and where do you think FS1 may go?
Yeah, after a year on the air, FS1 is canceling Christine Leahy's Fair Game. The last episode is going to be around December 26th or the 27th. From what I heard, the show just never found an audience. They were happy with the performance, her performance, but it just never caught on. The whole idea of the show, Brooksy, was supposed to be trying to go back to the old Roy Firestone one-on-one long-form interview. And maybe that doesn't work in this day and age, but it didn't work this time. As far as what could happen in that time slot, I'm hearing that there's a possibility there could be an all-new show and that they're looking at talent. And, actually FS1 has been pretty happy with their studio lineup this year. I mean, ratings are up, audiences are up. So there is an opportunity there maybe to give somebody, a new shot or reward somebody who's an up-and-comer.
The one area where they're a little soft is that show involving Chris Carter and Nick Wright. Of course, Chris Carter's no longer, I guess, with Fox Sports FS1. So what happened with that show? I guess it's First Things First, and Jenna Wolf's on that show as well. What are they doing now? What do you expect is going to happen ultimately as they look to replace Chris Carter?
Yeah, that will go down as one of the greatest media blow-ups of the year. One day, Chris Carter was on the show, was a Pro Football Hall of Famer, and next day he was gone. And nobody ever gave a real explanation why he was gone. One of the things I heard at the time, and I reported at the time, was that Chris Carter was pretty ticked off that Fox was doing this Thursday night football pregame show literally down the elevator from his office in New York.
God,
and they're bringing in all these people from the West Coast to do the show, and Tony Gonzalez and whatnot, and he wasn't invited. So, I mean, that could have precipitated, that could have led to the blow up. What's next? I'm hearing that they are looking for an ex-NFLer to fill that slot opposite Nick Wright, that we could expect to hire by Super Bowl. The question now is, do they keep the format of the show or do they tweak it? You know, as you know, Brooksy, it's kind of another one of these embrace debate shows, right? You got the moderator and you got the two dueling opponents. Do they go in a different direction? That's what I'm hearing they're trying to decide right now.
That's interesting because Nick Wright is kind of he's the most serious daytime sports analyst there. I think him and Louis Riddick, you know, that'd actually be a good show, I think. But it's like watching CNBC, watching Nick Wright. I mean, I love Nick Wright. I think he's great, very insightful, but he's not a typical embrace debate guy. So I think that is a very, very interesting development. One thing that I know
that's a great comparison, Louis Riddick. I think they are very similar. They're both super talented, super smart guys. But like you said, in the morning, there's not a lot of smiles from them. I mean, they take this stuff like rocket science.
Absolutely. And I think Louis Riddick may be auditioning for a general manager's post in the NFL. At some point, he may end up in that situation. One thing that you mentioned, and we've talked about in the past, is with all of the news of Stephen A. Smith, his contract, and the fact that his contract was being renegotiated, Skip Bayless's situation has been brought up. There's a natural attraction there because, of course, those guys kind of ushered in the embrace debate as we know it together to this day. So what's Skip Bayless's status at FS1 and Fox, and what do you think the future holds for him?
Well, that to me is going to be the story of 2020. Do we see a reunion, the reunion of all reunions between Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith? I mean, right now, Stephen A. has his contract, so he's all set at ESPN. He's the highest paid employee at ESPN, somewhere in the area of $10 million. However, Skip Bayless, who Stephen A. calls his brother from another mother, his contract is up next year at Fox. So does Fox go to the well and, you know, give him that kind of money to stay doing Undisputed with Shannon? Or do they let him walk and he goes back and has a reunion with Stephen A? I don't even think they're bothering to hide it, Brooksy. I mean, the way they talk about each other in interviews, they're partners who have been separated but would never really been apart. They'd love to work together again.
Wouldn't that be, I mean, isn't Skip Bayless, if you were going to say there's one flagship personality at FS1, kind of that moors FS1, if you will, anchors it, isn't it Skip Bayless? Is it too much to say that would be a catastrophe for Fox and FS1 if he went to ESPN and reprise that show? That would be huge.
Actually, I would disagree with you there. I think the anchor, the one that holds it together there is Colin Cowherd. Because Cowherd can do radio and TV, and he holds down the whole middle of the lineup. But you're right. I mean, in terms of big hires, I remember News Corp itself making a big deal over Skip Bayless when he joined them. I mean, it was supposed to be this epic hire. So it would blow a huge hole in their morning lineup. Skip and Shannon actually had their best week ever, Thanksgiving week, and the show is up. But it's still being swamped by First Take. It's still being swamped by Stephen A. And remember, these two men are friends. In many ways, Stephen A. Owes his career partly to Skip Bayless. Skip Bayless brought him back to First Take. He was just one of the guest hosts and made him his full-time opponent.
Right. Well, we're visiting with Mike McCarthy, Front Office Sports, and let's talk about a really interesting subject to me. I've got a lot of questions about the popularity of Premier League soccer because depending on who you talk to, it's wildly popular, and some people it's off their radar. But what is NBC doing with Premier League? What do you see other networks doing? How big? What's the ceiling for Premier League, and what's happening right now?
I think the ceiling right now is slow but steady growth. I don't think it's wildly popular. I don't think it's going to be challenging baseball or the NBA or the NFL. I think it's slowly but surely making inroads. I mean, it's up a couple of percentage points every year on NBC, which does a great job with these underserved or new properties. And if you look at 10 years ago when the Premier League wasn't on the U.S. at all, it's probably up, over 50%. But in terms of, this great big leap where it's going to overtake these more native North American sports, I don't see that happening for a long time.
What do you make of, because there's been a little bit of talk of this, especially from stock market analysts, about Fox and their investment in broadcast rights, live broadcast rights, as one of their business models, and it might not be a great idea going forward. Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. I don't think they have anything else. I think
Right.
they pared back so much with the Disney deal that they kind of put all of their eggs into this basket. And if you're Fox and you're sitting there looking at the Thursday night football numbers, which were great this season, and you're looking at the game schedule they got, the Thursday night football, which was fantastic, you're saying this is pretty good. We're married to the NFL and we're married to Major League Baseball. And if something else cuts loose in the next couple of years when all these rights are going to be all up for grabs, then we're in pretty good shape. But, again, the NFL is the driver of everything. You and I have talked about what's happening with the NBA this year. I mean, look at the NFL. Look at where it is. It's back up 6-7%. It's bigger than it ever was.
You got to educate me on this. Just bottom line this for me, because so many people talking about the NBA ratings. It's amazing. But I had no idea that so many people were fascinated by it in the first place, but that don't necessarily work in sports media. But that aside, what about Mark Cuban's side? Mark Cuban says, we're on cable. The NFL is over the air, and that's why it looks like our ratings suck, and that's why we're losing viewership, because we're on cable and we have cord cutters, and the NFL doesn't have to worry about that.
Yeah, I think Mark Cuban is a great salesman. And I think he's selling you something there. I mean, you know what I mean? He's always making excuses for his own team and for the NBA. Is cord cutting a part of it? Of course. The younger students, younger kids don't watch cable packages or broadcast TV the way they used to. But at the same time, there's other properties on cable TV, like the NFL, that are up this year. Monday Night Football, for example. So why isn't cord cutting impacting them the same way it is? I think what Mark is not getting around to is this. Nobody cares about the NBA before Christmas Day. Charles Barkley's been saying that for years. Clearly, the players don't care because they're willing to sit out and because of load management. The coaches don't care because they're willing to have their star players sit out during nationally televised games.
Right.
So if they don't care that much about the early part of the NBA season, why should we, the TV viewer?
Visiting with Mike McCarthy of Front Office Sports. Another bottom line DAZN for me, because I don't even know what it is anymore. I mean, I don't know what it is, and they've got Pat McAfee on there. What's going on with that strategy, you think? And what are we now? I'm hearing it's all about an acquisition. The baseball highlight show didn't really work out. I mean, what's happening over there?
Yeah, I think DAZN is a spider. It's sitting there waiting and lurking for the day when all these leagues are willing to give up on regular TV and say, all right, we're going to go give one of our main packages to a streaming service. That's when it's going to pounce. I mean, the DAZN really is where you are. If you're in Italy, it's much different from what it is in the U.S. or what it is in Canada. In the U.S., we know it primarily through boxing and baseball. And I think they did something very smart recently by giving away free content with these boxing documentaries as a way to draw people in and sign up for the service. Because once you see some of these documentaries, like the last one they did, it's called One Night, that looked at the first Ruiz fight, and it was a terrific documentary. And if you watch that documentary, you could say to yourself, hey, $99 for the year, this is worth it. So I think what DAZN is doing is waiting and watching in the same way that the Facebooks and the YouTubes and the Amazons are waiting and watching for the leagues to turn around and say, okay, we're ready to give one of our main packages. Not one of the little ancillary packages, but one of the main packages to you guys.
That's going to be fascinating to see what happens. What do you think of Pat McAfee? Because he's not only on DAZN, he's everywhere now. I mean, where do you see him going in as a career and in the industry?
I love him. I think he's a breakout star. I think he's been terrific. I haven't seen a guy, get this many appearances so fast, so quickly. I could see him on College Game Day. I mean, I think he adds something to College Game Day. He does great on Get Up with Greeny. Greeny's got him solidly in the rotation. So I could really see him going anywhere he wants. I could see him doing his own radio show. I could see him doing his own TV show. Or he can just continue to be kind of the wacky guest who comes in and just lights up the set.
So tell us about front office sport. Well, how did you? I know we've talked about this before, but I am interested because you guys are continually adding new things, kind of innovating the industry. You're a disruptor in the sports media business space. Describe where you guys are and why should I care? Why should I go and look at your website and look at your Twitter feed?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, the guys who founded Front Office Sports, Adam and Russ, are two of the smartest young guys I've ever met. Super talented. Number two, we're heading north on a trajectory like you've never seen. I mean, we're growing by leaps and bounds, and as you know, in this business, that's rare. Everybody else is retrenching. I mean, I'll tell you, give me an example. Last month, we had more page views than Sports Business Journal. They've been around 20 years. We've been around 5 years. So
Wow.
what does that say?
Wow. Yeah.
And the final thing that is very important is we're free. Everybody else is behind a paywall these days, right? You can subscribe to our newsletter and go on our site for free.
Last thing for you. What are your thoughts about I mean, there's so many kind of opaque mysteries out there that we've been talking about. I think the Zone's in that category. And I think The Athletic, to a certain extent, do they really have 600,000 subscribers? Are they going to be this worldwide enormous entity? I mean, what are your thoughts about The Athletic?
Well, I think The Athletic, if they can continue to do stories like that Kenny Rosenthal scoop on the Astros, that is what they need to put them over the top. Because if they can get the kind of scoops like that, and then we as readers, you read The Athletic, I read The Athletic, I love it, you're going to say, I am willing to re-up my subscription every year because I'm going to get something that I cannot get anywhere else. And you know why? Because they're willing to pay for talent. I mean, I could go through, 10 different media sites or media newspapers and magazines anymore that I don't read anymore because they don't have anything new. They don't have any talent. They don't have any writing that's quality. It's just not there anymore. It is there at The Athletic.
What's the future of Sports Illustrated?
Boy, I mean, I don't particularly like this business model that they're throwing around here with the Maven, where they basically
They're doing the opposite.
They're doing the opposite, right? And, they're going to have the same people writing and selling ads. I mean, it just goes against everything. It's a shame. I mean, I heard you mention Sports Illustrated earlier in the show. You and I grew up with it. We revere it. We still, can remember 50 different covers. You know what I mean? That
it was ESPN. Rick Riley was a rock star.
Yeah.
If you're young, you don't realize how huge it was.
Yeah. And I mean, all I could do is shake my head in sadness at where they're going with this now, because I've been around this business long enough to know that this sort of chop shop, sweatshop model doesn't work. It's basically, just disposable people. People come, people go. They don't leave any impact because you're not really investing in the property. They're really trying to, skate along on the name. And I don't think that's going to, keep them afloat for long.
But here's the thing. Is it the property itself that's the problem in this situation that's caused them to come in and think they could do this? Or is it this specific group of people right now that are doing what they're doing? What's the issue here going forward? Is Sports Illustrated ultimately not a viable business going forward?
I think it's still a viable business for now. But I think once, all the talent has gone from there and is not being replaced, and basically they've just turned it into a content factory,
right.
You know what I mean? Aggregation. Well, that model petered out 10 years ago. I mean, I don't know what exactly this Back to the Future approach is going to do. We've already been there and done that with USA Today and a million other places, and it didn't work, and it just sort of collapsed upon itself. So now they're going to try it one more time with Sports Illustrated because they don't have anything new in their pocket. They don't have any new ideas. So go ahead, give it a try.
What about you? You teach a class, right, at Rutgers?
I do, at Rutgers University.
What's the class? What's going on right now?
I teach multimedia sports reporting. Very talented group of kids. I mean, what's amazing is a class like that really makes you feel good about the business because you see how many people are excited about sports, want to be part of the sports world. But at the same time, you have to leaven their expectations by telling them, look, this is very competitive, very difficult field to enter. So, you got to work hard, you got to have talent, and you got to have the contacts to get ahead. But it's a great thing. I just finished up my 9th or 10th semester, and I really enjoy it.
What about social media when you talk to people that age, get into the business? Because it seems like to me there's an overemphasis on something like Twitter by the media. Oh, we're going to put everything, all of our good stuff, we're just going to give it to you. Not on our website. We're going to do it on Twitter. And I think that there's a law of diminishing return there, especially going forward in the future. I think that's actually starting to weaken a little bit. But what's your approach with younger people?
That is really interesting. You put your finger on that because the older generation, my generation of journalists, is all about Twitter, 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 Twitter. They're about TikTok and Snapchat and a million, a
Yeah,
million other different
yeah,
platforms. And I
yeah.
talk to them and say, "You got to be on Twitter," and they're like, "Twitter,"
Right. Thank you.
and I tell them that because
Two
that's where
old
we
guys
are.
here. Right. That's amazing. Well, you know what? I look at Twitter being kind of the legacy media, old television media scoreboard that they never had,
Yes.
and that they're kind of playing off each other. But it's funny you say that. It's just a reminder that, and that's kind of an ominous note to end on, Mike. But I'm glad we have this note. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much for the insight. Great job, man, over at Front Office Sports. You guys are kicking ass.
Oh, thank you. We really appreciate it, and it's been a lot of fun.
That's Mike McCarthy. He is, of course, over at Front Office Sports, does a great job. And you want to follow him on Twitter. Tremendous follow. He's M. McCarthy, REV. M. McCarthy, REV on Twitter. Let me double check, make sure I have that exactly correct on Mike McCarthy. Outstanding job by Mike today. And yeah, I got it right. And Clarence Hill Jr.'s Twitter is Clarence Hill Jr., JR, all one word on Twitter. And introduced during the segment. That was great to have Clarence on the show. Always great to have him on the show. Not short of opinions at all. And nor is Mike. And the thing about Mike that's interesting is, most people in the sports business media space come from kind of a trade magazine background or a trade magazine approach. And certainly Front Office Sports, has genre to a certain extent. But what that really represents is branching off from focusing just on trade, an audience that involves people in a certain industry, insiders and executives, and maybe bringing that sports business angle to the mainstream. Because I think there's a lot of things that are relevant to sports that people, typical sports fans, find interesting and they should be informed about. I think a great example would be if you look at the Raiders right now and what is guiding Greg Davis, the owner of the Raiders, in player acquisitions or not making player acquisitions. He just had to file for a $385 million loan that the NFL recently signed off on as part of his relocation to Vegas. Obviously, Greg Davis is short of cash. Dean Spanos, somewhat similar situation with the Chargers. We know that is a total disaster. What's happening here in Los Angeles as it pertains to the stadium, moving into the stadium. I mean, what's that going to look like? What are they going to do at quarterback? Would they bring in a Cam Newton, someone who you would assume would make a commitment to pay a lot of money? Are they in a position to do that? We have no idea. But that's why you want that sport angle, in addition to some of the things that we talked, right? So that's, I mean, I love following that stuff, and that keeps you ahead of the game. I want to double back one quick thing that actually we did run that. Let me look back at what we've done so far. We we ran the Josh Gordon clip, did we not, Cam? Cam Smith, our producer here on Sports by Brooks on. Yeah, we did. Okay, we ran that. And I really wanted to drive that point home, a particular part of that point with Clarence. And man, am I ever glad he tweeted that out. That needs to get out. Because, yeah, I want to run, by the way, I want to run one clip here in a second, clip number 1 in a second, Cam, before we sign off today. But that's the kind of story. When you hear Josh Gordon has demons, right? That sort of insinuation. The demons were the coaches at Baylor. That's the story. No one's saying Josh Gordon's not responsible for what he's done. But we have to acknowledge and publicize and name names in those situations to get that sort of thing stopped. Let me just tell you, this is what I've learned from, again, my studies of college football, particularly at schools, right? I'll guarantee you that the situation happening with Josh Gordon at Baylor has happened at every major college football factory you can name at one point or another. Not every coaching staff, not coaches regime, but coaches helping players beat drug tests or cheat on their academics, right? That's happened at every single school, in addition to other things. Think about North Carolina. You know, the basketball players, when Dean Smith was there, this is the dirty little secret here. When Dean Smith was there, the basketball players were not students. They weren't taking classes. They weren't doing anything. Sorry to break the news. For all we know, Michael Jordan was not a student at North Carolina. You know, we haven't gotten to the bottom of that. That's one of the biggest scandals of all time. But is it really a scandal? No, because that kind of crap's happened everywhere. And it's happening right now. And there's coaches right now at major college football programs helping athletes like Josh Gordon beat drug tests by cheating on them. That's happening right now. And those athletes have demons. Okay, that's what it is. And as Josh Gordon said, it started early with him. Gee, I wonder why he's high playing football every day. I wonder why he can't stop. I wonder why. So I want to run one more clip for you today. I mentioned it yesterday. We ran part of the clip that we tracked down, and it involves the Patriots, and it's a very important point involving the Patriots, Bengals, and the videotaping stuff, right? It's Dan Orlovsky, and Dan Orlovsky, former NFL quarterback, friend of the show. He's been here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred before, but this was Dan Orlovsky, if you could bring that clip up, talking about his experience.
I played against them a couple times.
Patriots
it's either you don't
played.
know or you don't care. Either way, it's a problem for Bill Belichick, right? And so people have perspective, right, about playing against the Patriots. I played against them a couple times. When you go to Foxborough, you're told by your team pretty religiously, don't leave your stuff in your room. I don't know. Don't leave your stuff in your room.
In your hotel room.
Never leave your stuff in your hotel room. If your game plan is in your backpack and you want to go to dinner, you bring your backpack with you.
Jesus.
Playing the Patriots a couple times. There's two stadiums that our communication would always go out in. It would go out in Foxborough. It would go out in Minnesota. All the time.
Headsets.
It would just happen. And so we were always prepared. When your communication goes out, in the NFL nowadays, everything is relayed in audio. When your communication goes out, you have to hand signal some stuff.
Ding, ding,
It's either
ding.
you don't know.
Ding, ding, ding. Hand signals. Did you just hear that? When your communication at Foxborough, which it always did, you got to use hand signals. And where do you signal things in from? The sideline. And what were the Patriots caught doing from 2007? Filming sideline. And what did the Patriots tell the people who got caught filming the sidelines, or what to say if they did get caught filming sidelines by security or other teams? Tell them that we're filming for an in-house TV show. It has nothing to do with football, right? Profiling somebody. Yeah, that's 2000 to 2007, right? That's exactly what's happening right now. Exactly. And we know that Bill Belichick has a fixer, and he's still there, Ernie Adams. You've heard that name, Ernie Adams, on this show, nowhere else. Bill Belichick has his own fixer. So as far as I know, Bill's probably telling the truth when he says, I didn't know anything about it, because he signed off on that. Obviously, they've signed off on it. We know that for a fact. And of course, the NFL in the past has been complicit because the tapes in the past didn't get out. They were burned and stomped on, and literally by NFL personnel, destroyed them. not the Patriots, NFL personnel. We know that thanks to the 2015 article from Seth Wickersham and Don Van Natta of ESPN. 2015, ESPN.com. Google it, right? So doesn't matter what Bill Belichick directly knew in this situation, but this is a reckoning for the NFL. Hopefully they understand. This really isn't about more. The Patriots are just that example of a team that's done this over and over again. You know, are we going to have integrity in the NFL? It certainly appears that they're attempting to do so after the Rams Saints debacle and the non-call, what they've done with the PI reviews for better or for worse. At least they're trying, it appears. But in this case, if the NFL doesn't do anything, if they dock them draft picks, let's run one more clip. And this is the only main media personality that I've seen who has talked about what could be significant punishment for the Patriots. It's Jason La Canfora. This was on CBS Sports HQ on Sunday. This is Jason La Canfora of CBS Sports. That's clip number 3.
However, given the Patriots, who would have thought that they would find themselves in this type of trouble once again? But take us through what the penalties could be for what seems to be a minor infraction, but however, given the Patriots, given their history, could lead to some big results from a penalty standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is they're repeat offenders of the league's game day operations manual. Some would say they've done it somewhat habitually, and there have been investigations in the past where they've been stripped of first-round picks, yet still a lot of flags raised by this. Whatever you think of the 8-minute tape and how much there is to glean from it of the Bengals sidelines, I can tell you this, the Bengals think it's a big deal. Zach Taylor had to show it to both sides of the ball, his entire staff, to try to figure out what they were up to, what the Patriots may have been able to figure out. What was going on there. I'm told Mike Brown is livid. If you're the Patriots and you want to go do a feature on a scout in a game in which your team is not playing and not your press box, then the league office feels like, you know what, don't just call the Browns. You need to also call the Bengals because that's the team you were advancing. And you should probably notify the league as well that, hey, we're going to have an unusual situation with our cameras in a press box in another NFL city. They did none of that, and it took the Bengals intervening to eventually confiscate the tape and bring this to a head. That's not ideal either. There's not, a necessity to judge intent here. Whether you find a smoking gun to Bill Belichick or somebody else doesn't matter. They've already admitted it. It's illegal. It runs afoul of the rules, and they are a repeat offender. The league has made a routine practice of taking draft picks away from people who do things like this, whether it's the Browns with the illegal cell phones from the press box, whether it was the Atlanta Falcons pumping in fake crowd noise. They take it seriously, and they're going to lose at least one draft pick. I'm not sure it's a first-round pick, but it could be a second or a third. We'll see, pending the results of this. But the league does believe it's a big deal, and it's just unfortunate that it's always the Patriots involved in this stuff.
Always the Patriots. Always the Patriots. And always the Cowboys, as we've been talking a lot.
There you go. What the NFL does, I said this a couple of days ago, it's just a referendum on what they think of the media. Whatever the NFL does in this case, whatever it always does, but what it thinks of the media, if it thinks the media will hold it accountable, people will hold them accountable, right? We'll report the truth as they find out about it, won't cover things up or not. So if Belichick, specifically Bill Belichick is the conversation right now. Not about whether he knew it or not. That's not the conversation. It's what is his punishment? He's the CEO. It's like a CEO of a company dumping pollution into a pristine river over and over and over again. They've been caught. It's been documented, right? And in the past, that cheating was systematic and vast in scope, in organization, right? And the person who was involved in perpetrating that, Ernie Adams, along with Belichick overseeing it. Bill Belichick couldn't have possibly have known about all the cheating they were doing. There was so much. If you read the article, you'll find out specifics, right? So at some point, you got the same CEO and you're still dumping sludge into a pristine river right above your water supply. So, what are you going to do if you're the governing body in that situation? Point, it's like a woman who has her husband cheat on her. If it happens once, twice, 3 times, and she comes to her girlfriends or to you or whomever, someone you know, and complains about it, right? You feel bad for her and you're pissed at the husband. But if the husband does it, think of Winston Bennett. Remember that guy? He did it like 10,000 times. Literally cheated on his wife like over 1,000 times. Winston Bennett, you may remember that, Cam. The woman who was doing the poor wife, people didn't feel sympathy for her. At some point, you've got to do something and stop it and move on, whatever it is, whatever that recourse is. And that's what the NFL is faced with here. Now, you'd never know that. That's the problem. It's the media. I mean, it's the media and, of course, the fans putting up with it. But the media is everything. Remember that. So as you're watching coverage, you're watching rhetoric, you're listening to rhetoric and body language, that kind of stuff, right? Watch that very closely, especially the high-profile people, right? High-profile NFL reporters, I might add, some of the highest who do promotional appearances for the NFL, right? Advertisements for the NFL, other leagues. NBA does that too with some of the high-profile reporters. That should never happen, ever. So, but that's why I don't think anything's going to happen to Belichick. But if nobody even brings it up, I mean, Greg Bedard brought it up on this show, and he's an esteemed longtime NFL reporter, writer, observer, analyst, insider, right? This should be a drumbeat. That's all that matters now. What's going to happen to Bill Belichick? You can't have him on these NFL 100 promos every 5 seconds, holding forth, right, from the Mount at Delphi, the Oracle. And he's a documented underminer of that NFL 100 system. What makes it so important to us? He's done nothing but undermine it. And so we can all pretend that's fine. If you want to do that, that's what we've been doing so far. I mean, you look at Tom Brady's situation. It's a miracle that guy has put up what he's put up with, whether it's with Belichick or people in Kraft, that he had to take, he had to take the bullet for Deflategate. It's amazing. And the way they've treated Brady, I mean, I don't think people have really put it this way. Maybe they have. But the Patriots have shit on Tom Brady for years. Is Brady part of it? Yeah. Go along with it, I guess. Don Yee, his agent, should have been more aggressive, right? You would think. I mean, it's kind of an obvious thing. Well, now come to think of it. Think of it this way. I don't know about you, but with Tom Brady particularly, over the years, every time, because you hear this every year, Tom's taking less money. He's doing the team as solid. He's a team guy. He wants rings. Rings are he's got enough money. His wife makes more money than he does, right? Hear all those things every year for over a decade, at least, right? Great relationship with Bob Kraft. It's all good, right? Where's Don? Where's his agent? Right? Oh, that's, they're all they're all on the same page, pulling in the same direction. Everything's cool. Right. Well, apparently it's not cool. And it never was cool. Because you've got Brady like withdrawing himself from charities sponsored by the Patriots and Kraft right now, that kind of stuff, right? And it's not a coincidence that media people are floating out, right? So it wasn't okay all these years, and that's why he's leaving. Right? Again, Brady should have prevented some of that stuff from happening. But make no mistake, that's Bill Belichick. Kraft may sign off on it, but it's Belichick. Belichick's the guy who would rather get rid of you. Everybody does this, of course, but would rather get rid of you, before than after. But when it comes to Tom Brady, right, he treats Tom Brady the way he would treat like a long snapper. Bill Belichick, clearly he does. He treats everybody the same. And I guess that's to his credit. But it isn't to his credit in this situation. I think if Brady leaves, and what's going to happen is, if Brady does leave, Tom, of course, will never say this, which is part of the problem. But if he leaves, signs with the Chargers, wherever he goes, the Dolphins, right? They're going to say it's because of Belichick. Nobody. No one will say that. Zero. Nobody. So that's my opinion. Now, you know how I feel about it's not Bill Belichick. It's just that a guy gets away with what he gets away with, right? And I'm not saying their Super Bowls are illegitimate, but how would we know? How would we know? So, great job by our producer, Cam Smith, today. Thanks to our guest, Clarence Hill Jr. of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the dean of Dallas Cowboys beat writers, Mike McCarthy of Front Office Sports. Tomorrow, we will have Phil Perry of NBC Sports Boston, the Patriots insider, along with Tom Curran, who's a friend of the show. Phil will make his first appearance on the show. Tomorrow, we'll talk, obviously, Patriots and what's going on. We'll just talk about. Jamel Hill will also join us tomorrow. And Tim Brando will join us tomorrow. So that's coming up tomorrow. Show starts at noon every weekday. And for Cam Smith and everybody at Fancred, this is Brooks Melchior from Los Angeles saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks.